He's been indicted. He's 26, murdered CEO Brian Thompson outside the Hilton. He's charged with murder, one count of murder in the first degree. Wow. Calling it in furtherance of terrorism.
We are here to announce that Luigi Mangione, the defendant, is charged with one count of murder in the first degree and 2 counts of murder in the second degree.
Mangione has received 158 deposits into his prison commissary account. Also, as of this afternoon, he's received 40 emails and 53 pieces of mail. That's notable because that's up considerably from the 6 pieces of mail that he had received, as we reported.
Luigi Mangione, now indicted in New York. We've been waiting for this one to come down. We've got the full indictment. We're going to read through it. It looks like this. Not a big one, 6 pages, but it details the murder charge. And so we'll see what Alvin Bragg has come out with today. We also will spend some time going through the press briefing and seeing what they say here. Now, Alvin Bragg is coming off the heels of a loss in the Daniel Penny trial, which should never have been brought in the first place. And Bragg is also somebody who has now scored a little bit of a victory because Judge Merchan has said President Trump does not have any presidential immunity at all in the New York prosecution for the false business records upon which Trump had 34 guilty verdicts. So Bragg is now, I think, spinning this into Luigi Mangione, and he's going to try to make this a good case to cover up his just history of failures. One of the worst DAs maybe in the country. I mean, he's brought a lot of cases that have been very poorly presented and prosecuted. Maybe next to Fannie. If Alvin Bragg hires his lover and starts indicting her or him, then maybe he would be worse than Fannie, but the two of them are neck and neck. So here's the press conference. Bragg announces a murder indictment of Luigi Mangione. So here's what it says. It says that they came out and they announced he's been indicted. He's 26, murdered CEO Brian Thompson outside the Hilton. He's charged with murder, one count of murder in the first degree. Wow. Calling it in furtherance of terrorism. Okay, remember, we were just seeing him charged with second degree murder, and people were saying, well, why second degree? And what we learned is in New York, first degree murder is like murder plus. So second degree murder, you can still have premeditation. It's almost analogous to first degree murder in other jurisdictions, but it's like murder plus. So it's like if you murder a judge, or if you murder a cop, or if you murder somebody who's a healthcare worker, there's things that aggravate it and make it first degree. So here in furtherance of terrorism is what they're saying. And now, like, basically everything is terrorism. Is this terrorism? I mean, I think a lot of the healthcare CEOs are pretty terrorized right now. They deleted their leadership boards from all of their websites, right? But is that what terrorism is? We'll have to see what the indictment says, and you can be the judge. Now, 2 counts of criminal possession of a weapon in the second degree, 4 counts. They say, we allege that Mangione carried out the brazen and targeted fatal shooting of healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. This type of premeditated targeted gun violence cannot and will not be tolerated. And so I want to extend my heartfelt condolences to everybody involved. Now, they say, according to court documents and statements made on the record, we've got the following set of facts. And so let's just go to the indictment and get it directly from them. As we can see, this is the indictment. The people of the state of New York versus Luigi Mangione, telling us that the grand jury of New York, by this indictment, is now accusing Mangione of murder in the first degree. And that is the most serious type that they have. The defendant on December 4th, being more than 18 years old, with the intent to cause the death of another person, caused the death of Brian Thompson. And said person was killed in furtherance of an act of terrorism involving a violent act and acts dangerous to human life that were in violation of criminal laws of this state and were intended to intimidate and coerce a civilian population, influence the policies of a government unit by intimidation or coercion, and affect the conduct of a unit of government by murder, assassination, or kidnapping. So they go into New York law and they say he hits it. Now, second count is murder in the second degree, right? And that's what we saw originally. I believe that was just a direct complaint. But now murder in the second degree comes up, saying the defendant with the intent to intimidate committed murder in the second degree when he intended to cause the death of another person, Brian Thompson. Now, third count, murder in the second degree, caused the death. Okay, so murder in the second degree, it's a separate section because they're charging this as with an aggravator of terrorism. And they found that in this statute right here, 490.25. So not a lot of details on that. So the terrorism is just intimidation. So intent to intimidate. Is that what he intended to do, to intimidate other CEOs? The argument would be, yeah, he put depose, deny, delay, whatever the words were on the bullets. And so that was trying to send a message. Cause the death to try to influence the policy, which I guess would be don't be healthcare CEOs who deny people claims. Now, the third count is just a simple murder in the second degree. Fourth count, possession of a weapon, criminal possession, possessed a loaded firearm with the intent to unlawfully use it against another person. So I don't know what New York York laws are about guns, but they're probably terrible. So he had a weapon, he used it, that's illegal. Fifth, criminal possession of a weapon, saying that he possessed a loaded firearm that is not in his home or business. So in New York, probably illegal to have a gun that's not in your home or business. And sixth count, third degree possession, he possessed an assault weapon. Okay, how do they define assault weapon in New York? That 3D printed handgun was an assault weapon? I guess so every gun is an assault weapon, according to New York law. Criminal possession of a weapon in the third degree, he also possessed a silencer. So maybe there's something in New York law about 3D weapons or silencers that aggravates it. Eighth count, he had a large capacity ammunition feeding device, a Glock magazine, which under New York law must be illegal. And similarly, he had a Magpul magazine. He possessed a large capacity ammunition feeding device, a Magpul magazine. 10th count continues on. Fourth degree weapons charge, not being a licensed gunsmith or dealer, knowing that it was a ghost gun, he possessed a ghost gun. No serial number on there, 3D printed. And 11th count, forged instrument. He had the fake ID, an instrument that was forged with the intent to defraud and deceive other people, which was a New Jersey driver's license. All right, so this is the indictment. You can see we've got, looks like 11 charges, 11 counts against Luigi Mangione, filed in New York by Alvin Bragg. And so he is now facing the most serious charges you can face in New York, murder in first degree with terrorism. And not a lot of new facts that came out in this indictment, but we'll see what Alvin Bragg said during his press conference in New York. This is how it went down.
Good afternoon. I'm Alvin Bragg, Manhattan District Attorney. I'm honored and privileged to be joined by Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch. First and foremost, I want to extend my deepest condolences to Mr. Thompson's loved ones and colleagues. His family deserves our respect as they continue to grieve. Our work will never be able to undo the fact that a life was lost. We are here to announce that Luigi Mangione, the defendant, is charged with 1 count of murder in the first degree and 2 counts of murder in the second degree, including 1 count of murder in the second degree as an act of terrorism. For the brazen, targeted, and premeditated shooting of Brian Thompson, who, as you know, was the CEO of United Healthcare. This case was made possible by the collaborative efforts of the phenomenal public servants you see before you today and so many others who are not here. I'm honored to lead the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and privileged to serve alongside Assistant District Attorneys Joel Seidman, Kristen Bailey, and Zachary Kaplan, who were working from the outset hand in hand with the greatest police department in the world. Chief of our trial division, Lisa Del Pizzo, and the Deputy Chief, Chris Prevost, provided sage oversight and direction. And I want to acknowledge our high technology analysis unit. There was a lot to be processed here. Steve Moran in particular, who heads that, and Marco Popic. We are privileged here at the DA's office to work every day with the phenomenal public servants at the NYPD. It has been a distinct pleasure to work besides Commissioner Tisch, an exemplary partner,
and they identified him that way.
Joseph Kinney, almost every day we're in touch, and his leadership is second to none. And then Deputy Commissioner Rebecca Weiner, who, as I tell her, there are a lot of challenging things happening in the world, and I sleep better at night knowing that she is the Deputy Commissioner in charge of terrorism. The detectives on this out doing the courageous frontline work, Detective Oscar Diaz, Detective Curcio, exemplary, the finest. It wasn't just those of us here in New York. I want to acknowledge the great work of our partners in Altoona Police Department, the Blair County District Attorney's Office, the governors of New York and Pennsylvania, the FBI, and of course, the brave members of the public who answered the call when our great commissioner put out the call for their assistance.
Yeah, they found him. Okay, you guys didn't find him. He did. The caller did. McDonald's employee. Maybe she. I don't know. They called, and apparently she identified him with that beanie and that mask on. She's like, I would know those eyebrows anywhere, even though there's like a little bit of a unibrow problem and a difference. But anyways.
This was a frightening, well-planned, targeted murder that was intended to cause shock and attention and intimidation. It occurred in one of the most bustling parts of our city, threatening the safety of local residents and tourists alike, commuters and business people just starting out on their day. Let me say a bit more about the charges. They include 1 count of murder in the first degree as a killing in furtherance of terrorism, 2 counts of murder in the second degree, 1 charging that the killing was done as an act of terrorism, and the second pertaining to the fact that the killing was intentional. The maximum penalty possible for murder in the first degree and murder in the second degree as an act of terrorism is life without parole. The maximum penalty for murder in the second degree is 25 years to life. There are additional counts as well. A number of criminal possession of weapon charges, 2 counts in the second degree, 4 counts in the third degree, 1 count in the fourth degree, and a count of criminal possession of a forged instrument in the second degree. Let me tell you a bit about the facts. On November 24th, we allege that the defendant arrived in New York City to murder Brian Thompson. After the defendant arrived in New York City on a bus at Port Authority, he checked into the hostel on the Upper West Side using the name Mark Rosario with a fake New Jersey ID. On the morning of December 4th, the defendant left the hostel just after 5:30 a.m. and traveled to Midtown. For nearly an hour, we allege the defendant waited in the area near the Hilton Hotel waiting for Mr. Thompson to appear. From 6:38 a.m. to 6:44 a.m., the defendant stood across from the entrance of the hotel on West 54th Street. When he saw Mr. Thompson, he crossed the street and approached him from behind. We allege he then took out a 9mm 3D printed ghost gun equipped with a 3D printed suppressor and shot him once in the back and once in the leg. The defendant then fled northeast on 54th Street and took an e-bike uptown before getting into a taxi that took him to West 178th Street and Amsterdam Avenue. On December 9th, the defendant was spotted at McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania. The local police were notified. He was arrested, and he was found with a 9mm handgun, a suppressor, 2 ammunition magazines, and the same fake New Jersey ID he used at the hostel. I want to say a word about ghost guns. These weapons are increasingly proliferating throughout New York City and the entire country. Involving technology will only make this problem worse. Last year, over 80 ghost guns and ghost gun parts were recovered in Manhattan alone. The NYPD and the Manhattan DA's office have been leading in the interdiction of these ghost guns. And one thing I want to make clear, they're unserialized, they can be printed out, but as this case tragically makes clear, they are just as deadly as traditional firearms. This will remain a priority for us here in Manhattan. Finally, I know there have been questions about the extradition process. The latest that I can offer you is that the defendant is currently scheduled to appear in court in Pennsylvania on Thursday morning, first for a preliminary hearing on his Pennsylvania charges. Immediately to follow that will be extradition hearing. We have indications that the defendant may waive that hearing, in which case he's brought to New York forthwith. In any event, we have been preparing on parallel paths, and before the hearing, we'll send to the governor of the state of New York the paperwork that would be necessary if he does not waive during that hearing. Now I want to turn over to our great commissioner, and
we want to see if they get any
to thank her
questions
for her partnership, not only on this matter, but on all we do every day together. Thank you.
The unsealing of today's indictment brings us one step closer to securing justice for Brian Thompson and his family and affirming the primacy of the rule of law in the city of New York. NYPD detectives worked tirelessly to piece this case together, and along the way, the Manhattan DA's office made sure we had every legal tool available to us, whether quickly providing subpoenas to assist with our evidence collection or traveling with us to Altoona, Pennsylvania last week after the apprehension. Our partnership made this a successful investigation. So I'd like to thank District Attorney Bragg and his team for their work in bringing this case forward. Part of that work included the relentless collection and analysis of surveillance video by our detectives, which ultimately produced a clear image of our suspect. That image was shared far and wide through the media, and thanks to an observant McDonald's customer and the employee who alerted the police, Mr. Mangione was quickly brought into custody. This outcome is why we always emphasize the critical role of the public in our public safety mission.
We send the
so
best
again, I want to thank
NYPD.
everyone who saw something, said something, and did something. That is why we have a suspect in custody today. As DA Bragg said, Luigi Mangione is now formally charged and indicted for murder. And let me be perfectly clear. In the nearly 2 weeks since Mr. Thompson's killing, we have seen a shocking and appalling celebration of cold-blooded murder. Social media has erupted with praise for this cowardly attack.
I've got a news story about how much money they're sending him coming up.
Threatening the CEOs, other CEOs, with an X over Mr. Thompson's picture, as though he was some sort of a sick trophy. And yesterday, the New York Post reported that some extreme activists were circulating a deck of cards with other most wanted CEOs to be targeted for assassination.
Crazy.
These are the threats of a lawless, violent mob who would trade in their own vigilantism for the rule of law that protects us all. Let me say this plainly. There is no heroism in what Mangione did. This was a senseless act of violence. It was a cold and calculated crime that stole a life.
She got joy out of it.
And put New Yorkers at risk. We don't celebrate murders, and we don't lionize the killing of anyone. And any attempt to rationalize this is vile, reckless, and offensive to our deeply held principles of justice.
Well, good for her. A bunch of Democrats in New York are like,
extradition process in Pennsylvania to complete,
we're voting against you.
We continue our public safety work here at home. That includes our focus on the growing threat of ghost guns, one of which was used in this attack. The NYPD remains committed to tracking down and removing these untraceable weapons from our streets. And And we will do that work hand in hand with District Attorney Bragg here in Manhattan and in every other borough to ensure that those who possess, distribute, and use these weapons are held fully accountable. Finally, I want to again thank every member of the NYPD, uniform and civilian, working on this case, led, of course, by our great Chief Kenny, whether in Midtown North Squad, Homicide, Crime Scene Unit, Intelligence Bureau, and everywhere else. All of you contributed to today's indictment, and you've brought the Thompson family one step closer to justice in this case. Thank you.
Elaborate on the terrorism charge.
Sure. So, in its most basic terms, this was a killing that was intended to evoke terror. And we've seen that reaction. The statutory elements we can go into, but its most basic term, that's what this is. This was not an ordinary killing, not to suggest that any killing is ordinary, but this was extraordinary. And the New York State Legislature has, set out both the paths that we talk about, both the murder one and murder two. And this, we allege, is certainly squarely within those statutes, which talk about intending to do exactly what we saw happen here.
The commissioner has talked about how the defendant's been lionized and celebrated. I'm wondering how concerned you are a potential jury knowing that someone on that
getting
jury
somebody on that panel
lionized and celebrated.
Well, I want to echo
Get a juror
the
who donated to the
commissioner's
guy.
words, concerns, which I think would put forth beautifully. I mean, we
Bunch of New Yorkers acquit the
see
dude.
a lot in these jobs.
Wow.
I meet with the families of homicide victims, and I just can't wrap my head around the notion that someone is celebrating this. To your specific question, at the beginning of a litigation now with our charge, we have phenomenal trial team in place led by ADA Joel Seidman, who has been in this office for more than 40 years and handled some very challenging matters. We have voir process in place, faith in our jury system to select 12 people who can be fair and impartial, but we'll move forward, and that's something well down the road, but we'll be ready when that time comes.
Describe just how rare it is for your office to be charged with first-degree murder. There has been some talk about how that is certain very specific cases.
First degree is rare, right?
Also, you speak to the statements made on the record by the suspect that informed this timeline in particular, because maybe incriminating or statements that happened.
The first-degree murder statute has a number of subsections. They're sort of clearly delineated, and they are reserved for, the most abhorrent conduct, killing a police officer, serial killing, and the terrorism is one subsection of that. And so I would say, fortunately, that's not happening a lot. Taking a step back, I can't think of another office that is more equipped to handle a terrorism charge. We have a great terrorism unit. We were at the forefront of getting the statute passed. Within the last 2 years, we've tried two very significant terrorism cases, one involving an English-speaking operative based in Jamaica and another involving someone who was here and funding overseas terrorism by cryptocurrency. So we have the expertise, and as I mentioned, the expertise on this team, and so we're prepared to go forward. Yeah, I'm not going to go beyond what's in the filing. So as a matter of practice, I don't talk about sentencing outside of court as a first matter, and certainly not at the initial stages of a matter.
Will you be asking for life?
I think you can
is
tell
probably
the
the question.
seriousness with which we take this matter by the way in which it's charged. The murder in the second degree actually has a mandatory life without parole sentence. No discretion for the judge at all. So that's the maximum there. But I'm not going to go beyond that. We will first get the defendant to New York. We will have him arraigned. We will go before our judge. We will engage in pretrial litigation. If there's a trial, we're ably equipped to do that. And then we will proceed to sentencing, at which point we'll make our arguments in court. Thank you all so much.
All right, so no more questions from Alvin. And I think part of the interesting dynamic here is whether or not they'll be able to get a conviction on that terrorism charge. Because if he loses the terrorism charge, right, maybe the people on the jury say, well, he's a murderer, but I wasn't terrorized by this. And so it's not terrorism. And so what if he gets acquitted on that? But in other words, a split verdict would be very interesting. And Alvin is moving forward. Now, I mentioned before about this little unibrow situation, and we saw some pretty close contact on the eyebrows here that didn't look like they were all connected up there, right? And yeah, we got some interesting things going on there. So as you can see, people on the left, a lot of people love this dude. They're dumping a ton of money into his commissary account. 53 letters in the mail. He's got demented fans. 158 cash deposits into his prison commissary. They love him.
Pennsylvania. For a spokesperson for the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, as of this afternoon, Mangione has received 158 deposits into his prison commissary account. Also, as of this afternoon, he's received 40 emails and 53 pieces of mail. That's notable because that's up considerably from the 6 pieces of mail that he had received, as we reported yesterday.
All right, people now dumping money and love and energy into the guy. We'll be here continuing to cover it. He's going to be defending himself against all those charges. And so the indictment has now been filed. We'll keep our eye on this case, my friends. Thanks for subscribing and joining us as we do.